So what I'm going to do tonight is talk about the workflow that I did to get this horse and cart done, and to hopefully show that some things are really easier than you may think. So let's maybe get active on that screen, and we'll go to the next one. So we want to produce this, and I'm going to show you some Fusion screens, but I'm not going through how you draw it. Okay, that's not the object. So the first thing I done was to design the cart. I thought, well, that's the easy bit out the way, because that's just normal Fusion, straight lines, circles, etc. And then we start looking at the horse and the man. And I thought, oh, the horse, I'm not really into this sort of business. So what we do on that one, we look at the man first. Now the man was designed in Make Human, and here you have the screen grab of the man in Make Human. And if you use Make Human, it's very straightforward. I won't go into it now. There are videos, and we'll undoubtedly cover it again. But you can create the man easy. You can put a height in, you can put a build in, you can put how muscular he is, etc. And then you can dress him in various clothes. Now, within Make Human, you can also pose him, but I found the posing in Make Human is not ideal. So what I do, this screen over here now is a screen grab from Blender, where I've opened up the man into Blender. Now, I'm not going to go through how these two programs link together, but when you've got them set up and you open Blender, whilst you've got a Make Human screen open, in Blender you just click a button to pull him from here into there. And it's very easy for the posing. From the point of view of starting with a blank, naked body, as it were, and clothing him and so forth, in Make Human, 5 minutes maybe, and then pop him into Blender and another 5 minutes to pose him. It's very easy, and you end up then with an STL file out of Blender that looks something like this. Okay? Then the next stage is the horse. Well, we go to Thingiverse and we download a horse, and this is the horse that I found on Thingiverse, SLT file, STL file, and you download it, and that's the STL. That's a screen grab from my file manager to show you the horse that we've used. Next thing is back into Fusion, and we've covered this. Excuse me, as you know, we import the STL for the horse, and we import the STL for the man. Now, when you import them off, away from the cart, so you can scale them and orientate them, and then just move them to the positions you want them in. And then all I had to do then, you can see down here, we had to add in some tie bar things, as I call them, to connect the horse to the cart, and just go through and touch up a few blemishes. It's very straightforward. We've covered editing meshes in previous sessions, and we've got videos on Merg and the 3D site. Next stage is to export that STL file into your slicer program. I use Chitterbox, so the left one here shows it's imported. And what I do is rotated this through 45 degrees. Now, generally, when I'm importing things of this nature, so we got crosstalk again. I put this one at 45 degrees, but I'll talk a bit more about this later on, because when you've got legs like this, you can sometimes be better orientating so these legs are sticking up in the air. Because don't forget, the resin is opposite to FDM, that it's pulling upwards. So therefore, if you print this top part first, the legs stand more chance of coming out rather than printing the legs first. Now, this is the one in your 45 degrees, and on Chitterbox, I just choose light because I want a lot of supports rather than big heavy ones, and I just click auto support. I very rarely add supports myself. I'll go through it and check, and if there's some obvious ones or there's some red marks showing, I'll add a few. Or if I feel I need to put a heavier one in or a middleweight one, I might do that. But generally speaking, 95% of the time, on the sort of things I do, which as you know is from coach bodies and wagons to like your horses or people, I use auto support. I find Chitterbox is pretty good. Now on this one you can see I did a second copy and I rotated it the other way. So the first copy is that one, the second copy is over here, and now the horse is upside down. Because in theory, this one should print better on the legs, because you're printing the legs from a solid body, not from nowhere, as is the case with this one. Another thing I do, excuse me, quite often is fill the plate. It takes the same amount of time to print one as print two. So I always add stuff on the plate to fill it in. And the reason I done this one only yesterday, because I thought I better make sure this works if I'm telling you about it. I put a second one in on the other orientation to see what would happen. Now we go on to the print. I'll come back to Chitterbox at the end because Mike raised the question earlier about not sticking to the plate. But for now I'll just go on with this one. Now I use an Elegoo 9K. Alongside this one on the other side of the shelf is one of the original Elegoo Marses, which is very good at slightly lower resolution. So you can see my setup here. I've got the carbon filter on this side that comes with Elegoo, and I bought this small internal heater which mounts there. This particular one I think is somewhere around £40 from Amazon. My normal technique is I put the heater on some 20 minutes before I'm ready to print, even on a day like today. So therefore, and the lid is on obviously when the heat is on. The lid's only off here to show you. You can see I've made a small plastic cover to cover the bath, and I'll mention why in a moment. And after 20 minutes, the temperature on here is showing for me 26 degrees. And the reason I done that is because back up last September, I was getting all sorts of problems with not sticking properly, failing halfway through. And I decided to look at the label on the resin bottle, which I've not done before, and realized that the temperature on there was ideally 25, 26. And that has made a tremendous difference. It really has. And it fits in on the Elegoo and probably most printers. And you can see what I've had to do, look, is make a small notch in the cover. So the cable's permanent, a couple of cable ties, and then the cover comes down on top of it. You can see there the temperature's ready. Now, a little bit about the resin bath. I don't empty my resin bath. I've invested in two more, so I've got three of them. One with grey, one with white, and one with black. That's the only three colours I use. And the resin has been in this bath. I've not cleaned this bath for about 3 months. I've topped it up, and what happens, you can see, I've got that, let me just go back. When it's not in use, there's this cover on. But I've also made two separate covers and a couple of holders, so the two spare baths are in the cupboard underneath with resin in them. And I've not used those in months. So if you need to add more resin because it's getting low, then add it before you put the heater on, obviously, otherwise you're just adding cold resin. And then when it's up to temperature, just before you start, I use some strips of cardboard just to give it a stir. I don't use plastic because plastic might scratch the film, but if you use a piece of cardboard, you're quite safe. You haven't got to stir like mad, it's just swirling it around to mix it back up. And with grey resin, you can see it mixing because you see the black going back to grey again. But as I say, my baths, I can't remember the last time I physically cleaned the bath. I'm not even sure. The resin may have been in there more than 3 months. If you keep it, I must admit though that mine is in the railway room, which is part of the house. It's not in a garden shed, so it will never go much below 18. And there's no sunlight getting on it, but the cover's on it anyway. So this business of putting in fresh resin every time, for me, no, this works perfectly well. Now after printing is completed, I quickly take off the cover, the red cover in this case. I raise the bed, and I've got a little plastic thing here which allows me to take the bracket off that, or the bed off the bracket, rotate it through 45 degrees, put it back on again, put the red cover back on, and leave it for 10 to 15 minutes so what surplus resin is on there can drain back in the bath. Sorry about the quality of some of these now. The phone camera is not that good when you're trying to move things with one hand and take a photograph with the other one. I've got a little, excuse me, I've got a small little conservatory for this purpose, which has a door into the train room, so it's quite handy. And I put some disposable kitchen towel down, and you can see then this is put on there, with a metal scraper. I just get it under the edge, and once you get it under one edge, it will pop off very easily. And you can see here they both popped off, and I've removed the supports. Now with removing supports, be a bit careful, particularly if you've got fragile bits on there, as I did with parts of the horse. So what I tend to do then, if you can see my mouse pointer, the bottom of the support on the base, I've got an old pair of side cutters that I use for this. Don't use your ones for electronics because the plastic will blunt them, but an old pair of side cutters just to undo and cut some of the support to make them easier to pull off. But just be gentle with what you're pulling off. Most of them will come off very easily. Another reason why I use light supports only. The next stage I've got here is a tub the size of an old margarine type tub. I put the two models or other models of IPA, and I give them a swish around my fingers just to break off some of the looseless stuff. I'll come back to that in a moment as to why I do it like that. So you can see that process is very quick. Now once those have been done, before I pour this resin elsewhere, this IPA, sorry, back in the bottle, I put the bed in, and with an old paintbrush I just paint around it very quickly to get any surplus resin off. I wipe it with a cloth, and I put it back in the cupboard ready to go back on the printer. It's a 30-second job. I don't go in with sandpaper or scrapers. I just brush it off, wipe it with a clean one of these, the sort of cloth you'd use for the car, tidy cloth, wipe it clean, and then put it back in the cupboard ready to put back on. And because I don't calibrate the printer is calibrated again every 3 or 4 months, or when something goes wrong, so that goes back on straight away, ready for the next job. Now the two prints that we took off, they're finally now they're put in some fresh IPA, I'll explain in a moment, in this bath on this. And I only invested in this last year. I used to do it all by hand in this little, you can see behind there, I got a little ultrasonic tank. But I thought, oh, let's go mad and buy one of these things. So it goes in here now where it's on a rotational thing, and it gets a power wash, if you like, for about 4 or 5 minutes. And then it goes in the water and has a wash in water to remove any residue IPA. You can tell when the IPA is gone because initially the water will go a milky colour by the IPA, then it clears up. One of the things I do this for is that if you use an IPA that has old resin particles in it, then they will adhere to your prints and will have a sticky feel after curing and may obscure some detail, which I think will take me on to why I've got the next slide in. Now I thought I'd better explain my IPA cycle, if you like. I start off with new IPA. I tend to buy it by the gallon, it's a lot cheaper. And I've got 2 stages, so the new IPA goes in the final wash. The final wash being this basket here when we do a good wash, okay? That's what we call store, and it goes into storage one. Now, when it goes into storage one after the final wash, it goes in through a filter funnel with filter paper, and I use old milk bottles. The bottle that you needs to withstand IPA, which plastic will, and it needs to let light into it, which I'll explain in a moment. So then when I come to do another final wash, I can have a look at this, and this has been left standing on a shelf. Now, leaving it standing on the shelf has two things. It allows any resin particles to sink to the bottom, and because UV light can get in, it will solidify them. So you can decant off the resin and use it again. And therefore we go into this stage here. As you pour some out, you can see it. Is it dirty? If it's not dirty, then it goes back in the final wash. If it appears dirty, and I mean not crystal clear, then it goes, yes, it is dirty, so it goes up into storage 2, and storage 2 is used for the first wash where it's not so fussy, because that first wash, which was in the container, is to get off the bulk of the loose resin, which then gives longer life for IPA. Now again, that first wash then will be stored in a separate bottle in the same way. It's filtered in to get rid of the lumpy stuff, and that's left on the shelf. This is in a conservatory in daylight, so it gets plenty of UV light. And the same thing is, this bottle, after several months, has quite a solid layer of resin in the bottom of it. But again, same technique. When you come to do another first wash, is it dirty? No, use it again. If not, dispose of it. Now, normally this bottle gets used over and over and over again until one day I've got no IPA in there, just solid resin. And at that time you dispose of it. How you dispose of it is up to you. Dispose of it safely. Now, this level of cleanliness I think is important, because I found that if you've got old bits of resin or resin bits floating around that adhere to the part in the final wash, it sometimes leaves your print feeling sticky, which never really dries and becomes difficult painting. But as I say, it can clump and obscure, detailed parts. And apart from that, it's a good practice. Now, my entire washing from when I take the plate or take the bed off the printer to when I put the prints into the UV for curing is probably no more than 10 minutes for the whole process. And then finally, as I say, the prints are put in the UV source, and I use this Elegoo one. You can use a UV lamp. If you use your own UV lamp, make sure you've got it shielded for your eyesight protection. And again, these sort of things are 5 to 7 minutes to cure. Will depend a bit on the resin, the size of the print, the color of the material. The darker resins tend to need longer to fully cure, and then you've got your 2 cured prints coming out there. Then the hardest part of all is to paint them, and the smaller they are, the more difficult. So you can see it's been painted here, and in here then I've just put some, I think there's some old electronic spacers and some bits and pieces that I've splashed some brown paint on to make it look like a scrap metal cart. And there you can see the cart in situ on the layout.